CP-11, which is the squadron I was in, got credit for sinking over 100,000 tons of enemy shipping and damaging 100,000 tons. And we were just one of the Black Cat squadrons out there. So if the others were doing as well, the Japs were hurting pretty bad. Went to San Diego, reformed the squadron. I was kept with the squadron, and we deployed again in April back to the South Pacific. And that's when we got involved in Black Cat operation primarily. Done a lot of rescue work. Every time there's a big bombing by our carriers or the Air Force on one of the islands, we'd have 3 or 4 planes out in the perimeter standing by to pick up anyone that was shot down. And that was really a blessing to the aviators and to us as well. The pilots loved our airplane, the PBY, really because they had all the runway they needed to get airborne. And number 2, we had a lot of runways out there, and they came in handy quite frequently. But my PBY days were my life. That was my first tour, and I had 3 years with them, and you just absolutely, the good thing about it, we each had our own airplane, we maintained our own plane and flew our own plane in most cases. But the biggest challenge we had was pulling our checks while tied up at a buoy. You can imagine how difficult that would be to work on an engine. We did have engine stands that strapped around the engine, but if you dropped anything, it was gone. Spark plug or a tool or what have you. So we had to be very patient, be very careful in holding our maintenance tied up at a buoy. We were stationed in Port Moresby, New Guinea, in a tent city set up by the Seabees, and that's when we got involved in a evacuation of 219 Australian commandos. This happened in December 1943. Our squadron got picked to go in the northern part of New Guinea, where the Australian commandos were still fighting the enemy. We had secured the southern part of New Guinea at that time, so we had a pretty good base at Port Moresby. But the Australian commandos, when they needed supplies, we dropped supplies to them. It got to the point that they were kind of getting overrun and asked to be repositioned. Our squadron got picked to make this rescue. The PBY has a wingspan of 104 feet, and we had to land on the Seebeek River, which was 200 feet wide. So we made 19 individual trips in there to get these people out. We went in on a skeleton crew of only 5 people and no ordnance. We had to go in light to bring the big load out. Each plane came out with 25 commandos and some of their equipment. And there's 5 of us, so that was 30 people on each PBY. Fortunately, there's no mishaps. We got them all out of there in a 5-day period. And they were happy. They had a base south of us in New Guinea, but our main concern after getting loaded, I had to keep them all forward, and they just hung on to each other. And our main concern was that there's no debris coming down that river while we was trying to take off. That had spoiled our whole day. But we did get them all out of there, and that was one of the biggest rescue operations, I guess, in the Pacific at that time.
These guys are really in business. I don't have any idea what the final result they're shooting at, yep. But I'm sure they know what they're doing.
All right, we're recording.
Now flighting 120.
Heading on 120, Cat 15, thank you. Traffic and turn to make sure it's full. Northwest traffic, come on, can I get a full stop, 030. Cat 13, lead back, expect delays. We're on a hold right now. I'm calling departure a little over.
This artifact here today relates to two elements of the Vietnam War. One is the tremendous air-to-air combat engagements that occurred between U.S. Navy aircraft and North Vietnamese MiG fighter aircraft. And the second element that it represents is the prisoner of war experience of naval aviators and Air Force pilots during the Vietnam War. And the first U.S. pilot captured in North Vietnam was a young lieutenant junior grade named Everett Alvarez, and he was shot down in August of 1964. And throughout the intense air combat actions that occurred from that time all the way until early 1973, there were U.S. pilots that were shot down over North Vietnam, captured, and taken to various prison camps. One of the most notable ones was a place called Hoa Lo in the middle of Hanoi, which the POWs called the Hanoi Hilton. And being a prisoner of war in North Vietnam was a very unpleasant experience. A lot of deprivations as far as food, living conditions, and most notably, they were tortured intensely by their North Vietnamese captors. So it was a very difficult existence that required not only for them as a group to really hold everything together and be united in resisting their captors, but also individuals to have the fortitude to do so as well. And this drinking cup here comes from a prisoner of war. His name was Lieutenant John Ench, and he was a fighter pilot flying the F-4 Phantom II. And in May of 1972, it was a time of very intense air battles. And Jack Ench, who was a radar intercept officer or the backseater in an F-4 Phantom fighter, and his pilot, Lieutenant Commander Ronald McEwen, nicknamed Muggs, they actually shot down two North Vietnamese MiGs in air-to-air combat in May of 1972. And that was a very uncommon occurrence to actually shoot down two in one engagement. And the following August, Jack Ench was on a combat mission. He had a new pilot at the time, but he was on a combat mission over North Vietnam, and they were wildly maneuvering, trying to avoid enemy anti-aircraft fire. Their aircraft was hit by anti-aircraft fire. And Ench, while they were maneuvering, had his hand on a handhold, and shrapnel came into the cockpit and actually mangled his left hand, specifically his left thumb. And here he is in a situation that the aircraft is going down, so they had to eject from the aircraft. So Ench initiated the ejection with one hand and punched out. And when you eject from a jet aircraft, it's the violent force that comes at you because the aircraft is traveling many hundreds of miles an hour, and so it really hits you with quite a force. And in Ench's case, it dislocated both of his elbows. So here he is descending in his parachute, very painful injuries to his elbows and his thumb all mangled, and he lands in North Vietnam where he is promptly captured. And he's taken to Hoa Lo prison, and where he is actually given medical attention in a very primitive fashion. They managed to put his elbows back into place, and then they amputate his left thumb without the benefit of anesthetic or anything like that. So here he is, he has those injuries, and he has to endure those as he's going through life in captivity. And he was shot down in August of 1972, released in March of 1973, and one of the items that he brought back with him from his captivity was this drinking cup that they would use when they were eating while in captivity. But Ench added a few features to his, one of which was he actually etched the silhouettes of two flaming enemy aircraft going down to symbolize the two aircraft he had played a role in shooting down, and he identified the strike they were on when they were shot down. And then on the underside, he etched two stars to symbolize the two aircraft shot down. So this was a souvenir he brought back with him, and it's one of the many things that he and his wife Kathy, who waited for him at home while he was in captivity, donated to the museum for us to display and to provide information about that time in history to the American public.
The pilot of the NC-4, his name was Elmer Stone, and he was a Coast Guard officer, but he had been a friend of Curtis, the early aviation pioneer. And while he was stationed down near the Virginia coast somewhere, where the Wright brothers had made their early flights, he met Mr. Curtis and became friends. And he got the idea from that aviation could be used by the Coast Guard very well in its air-sea rescue work. And the Coast Guard liked the idea and had him transferred to Pensacola. And he was the first Coast Guard aviator to receive his wings. And he was there given designation Coast Guard Aviator #1. There was quite a scramble, you might say, to be on the crew list of the NC-4. All of you high-class pilots, including, I think, Richard Byrd and some of those other famous ones, wanted to be on the crew. And Stone was selected on the firm recommendation of Glenn Curtis, and he got to be the pilot. Of course, the plane captain who was in charge of the flight was later Admiral Reed, and he was the plane commander. The flight that was the key to the successful transatlantic crossing was the leg from Nova Scotia to the Azores, which is the only place they could fly with enough fuel to get there. And the three of the planes started, and two of them dropped out by going down to check their navigation, and the seas were too rough. The flight was made at night so that they could have a day takeoff in the late afternoon, make the flight at night, and then have daylight for the landing. So with two of them down, the first was damaged too badly and was lost. The other was able to taxi, drinking rusty radiator water, I'm told, and chocolate bars, and was able to taxi all the way to the Azores and got there too. But the NC-4 here was the only one to make it nonstop, and they were allowed to continue flying to Lisbon shortly thereafter, and then on up to Plymouth, England, to terminate the flight, the first transatlantic flight.
Bruce Dillard. I'm a former Blue Angel, number 8 events coordinator on the team 8990. Interesting day today. We're here because my son is getting a backseat ride in the 7 jet. The reason he's doing that, he is a writer and director, and he recently shot a movie about 2 real naval aviators, Jesse Brown and Tom Hudner. The story is Devotion, and it's a true story based upon their time serving together in VF-32 and some of their exploits during the Korean War and their friendship. And so JD was very fortunate to get a connection with the Navy that wasn't through me, to get a backseat ride, as the director. And certainly he'll, use this experience to further push the Navy story, whether it's in 2022 or in 1950. So when I was applying to the team, he was a year. He was born in '87, and so I was on the team 8990. So he was his second year and his third year of his life were the second and third year of his life were here on the team. So he was a toddler essentially. So there's some things that he remembers. I think, probably most not. Certainly we were gone every weekend, so most of the time was spent with his mother, going to the beautiful beaches here and the like. But yeah, very, very, very young. JD was a lacrosse player in middle school and high school, and so that was one avenue that he used to, potentially go to college. And so, but he also had this other passion for making movies, and quite frankly, it actually started not too long after I left the team. I had one of those big old VHS camcorders that I told him not to touch, and of course he did. And so he probably picked up a camera at about 5 years old, and he started getting serious about it in the 2nd or 3rd grade. So he's been doing this for a long time. So we sort of had two paths. He had the lacrosse and academic path. He did apply to the Naval Academy. He did apply to West Point. He got accepted to West Point, via lacrosse, and also the Naval Academy prep school via lacrosse. And then one day he called. He applied to a number of other schools on the film side. And one day he called and said, "Hey, Dad, I think I'm going to go in this particular direction," which was film. So he studied film at Syracuse for 2 years and spent a little bit of time at USC, and now here we are today. I've always told the kids to create as many options for yourself as you can. And so part of it was the artistic side, and then part of it was, the lacrosse side. And oh, by the way, Army actually reached out to him. So that's kind of how that started. He went to a lacrosse camp, where different kids come and they all watch you play, kind of a recruiting camp. So Army actually reached out first. And so we felt that, if Army is interested, then, that might help his chances of getting in. So, yeah, but at the end of the day, we provided guidance, but that's it. Ultimately it's his decision because it's his life. Our thing is if you can step away with a degree, that's all we care about. I remember being on the team. Someone said you don't enjoy being on the team until you're done, because it's pure work. I mean, obviously you have fun and there precious moments that you cherish, but I think that I don't think it'll quite hit me until the movie's released, and then we can sort of sit back and say, oh my God, I can't believe he did this, can't believe he did that. I was joking with somebody, they didn't have cell phones when I was on the team, where they were just coming out in the big bricks. So no cell phones, no cameras. I'm glad we have cell phones and cameras so we can take pictures and memorialize the moment to remember that it actually happened. But I don't think it'll really hit me until it's over, if that makes sense.